I counted in your church history volumes 571 passages where miracles happened, where angels showed up, where healings happened. We're not talking about some strange new doctrine, are we? No. And number 7, both movements believe in the spontaneous worship. I love the early saints because they would just break out. They would just break out. Volume 2, page 428. This is in the LDS version, by the way. I've read both, RLDS, LDS church history. First 2 volumes are remarkably similar. The differences don't really begin to show up until the 3rd, 4th, 5th volume. So I'm saying I trust what I'm reading. Brother Joseph Smith wrote this. Brother George Smith arose and began to prophesy when a noise was heard like the sound of a rushing mighty wind, which filled the temple, and all the congregation simultaneously arose, being moved upon by an invisible power. Many began to speak in tongues, prophesy. Others saw glorious visions. I beheld the temple was filled with angels, which fact I declared to the congregation. The people of the neighborhood came running together, hearing an unusual sound within, seeing a bright light like a pillar of fire resting upon the temple, and were astonished at what was taking place. I preached these 7 beliefs that Pentecostals, Latter-day Saints share in common at that Pentecostal church that night. Except I really went into it. I'm just giving you the cliff notes. BYU was filming in the back. Let me tell you what happened when I was through. Remember, it's always a good sign when people don't leave. They were lingering. We were standing around front, Roy Brown and I. Randall might have been up there with us. I can't recall. Roy Brown and I was. I don't know if you know Roy Brown. Okay. He's a good guy. Okay. We were just standing around up front. And in comes Carmen, a faculty member at that Pentecostal Bible College. She walks in with her daughter. Her daughter had her foot in a sling. Oh, she was in pain. She was limping. Roy says something. He said, well, would you like prayer? To the daughter. She can hardly walk. So she sits down. Roy and I just kneel, just say a simple prayer. She immediately takes the cast off, puts it under her arm, and she said, all the pain is gone. Said, I'm going home. She walks out with no pain at all. Now, I don't know if BYU's still filming or not.
No, they weren't, unfortunately.
They weren't filming?
They missed.
Well, everybody saw it happen right up front there. Did. Now, standing about 5 feet to my right was my lovely wife there with Marilyn Slaughter. You know Marilyn? Gay Spalding. They were standing right here. And I kept watching while I was speaking. A little old LDS couple, short, maybe in their late 60s, early 70s. They were sitting right here while I was speaking. I kept noticing them. They had come up while Roy and I were praying for Carmen's daughter. They had come right over here, and Gay and Marilyn and my lovely wife were ministering to them. She was filled with the Spirit. She received her prayer language right there and then. LDS precious lady, didn't she, hon? I'm not making this up. I'm in church. I wouldn't lie. In church. Okay, so. Let me wrap it up. We're doing okay. Okay. Let me give you a couple of illustrations, things we've got to see. We're seeing miracles. We're seeing spiritual manifestations among the saints. All right. I had one of the 12 apostles of Community of Christ say, Lynn, let's get together. We had lunch. We've become good friends. Really have. I like him. He was telling me, he said, Lynn, first of all, he leans over and he said, I want to tell you something. I love Baptists. He said, he says that. And he said, just tell me about some of the things that you're seeing about saints coming together. Then he shares, he said, he said, my sister has cancer in the throat. This apostle said, I just reached up, laid my hand on her, and she's healed. Cancer's gone. Last time we were together, he said, Lynn, how can we build bridges together? I said, how can we do that together? Our journey started about 10 years ago and wanting to see all the saints come together. Here's how it started. You doing okay? Okay. Here's how it started. I was contacted by Doug Mendenhall. I'm going back, this 2005. And he said, Lynn, can you come to Salt Lake City? He said, we're having an LDS conference. And we understand that you live in Independence, you're a Baptist minister, and you have a story to tell about the Book of Mormon, and we'd like to hear it. Would you come? That was in January 2005. I said, I'd love to come. I had 3 weeks to prepare. And I began to pray and ask the Lord, what do you want me to say? I've never spoken to Mormons before. And as we say sometimes as ministers, the heavens were brass, silent, nothing. And I'm sweating it because I got a plane ticket. 2 days before I got on that plane to fly to Salt Lake, that gentle, kind, faithful Spirit of God said these words to my heart. I want you to go, and I want you to ask their forgiveness. That's what he said. That's what he said. And immediately I respond to the Lord. I said these words. I said, Lord, I've never harmed a Mormon. That's what I said. And then it dawned on me, wait a minute. While I was doing some family research, we have one daughter, and I realized, wait a minute, Mom and Dad's going to be on the other side one of these days. She won't know who she is. So I started digging into our family history, and I discovered on my mother's side, she had a great uncle that lived here in the area, was a member of running the saints out of town here, Missouri mob. And when I discovered that, I come from a rich heritage of Baptist preachers. That hurt me. It really did. To think that he could have been at Hans Mill. He could have been. So I told the Lord, oh, I get it. You want me to go and ask forgiveness for how my ancestors treated yours. Yeah. So I did. I flew out. I had about 200 precious LDS brothers, your sisters, your first cousins, there at the conference. It was my turn to speak right before lunch. Now, I thought, I better prepare a statement of repentance. I better write this down because I could get all googly-eyed. And so I stood up before 200 precious LDS brothers and sisters and read a statement of repentance to them. And I won't read all of it to it, but I said, I ask your forgiveness for how my ancestors treated yours. I ask your forgiveness for how we Protestant believers, again, sadly, some of us ministers, how we murdered your women, your men, your children at Hans Mill. I ask your forgiveness how we drove your ancestors from their homes, how we plundered their possessions, how we burned their homes to the ground. I ask your forgiveness that some of the members of the mob who ran your families out of the state were Protestant ministers. Please forgive us. And I went on and on and on down the line. And I did. Good thing I wrote it down. I did break down right in the middle of it. I couldn't finish it. I just began to sob. There I'm standing behind the pulpit, and there's 200 LDS brothers sitting out there. I'm not weeping. I'm not tearing up. I'm sobbing. And I couldn't get control again. Got real quiet. A dear LDS sister gets out of her seat. A dear LDS brother gets out of his seat. Two of them come up on the stage. The dear sister takes my arm like this. The dear brother takes my arm like this and holds me up. And I finish reading that statement of repentance. They sit down. All of a sudden, it was like a choir director. Everybody stands to their feet, gives a standing ovation, applauds, would not stop. Then I preach. And I dismissed them for lunch. I'm to speak one more time in the afternoon. I was the last speaker before lunch. I'm also the last speaker of the day. And while I'm walking out of that church building, back in the foyer, a dear brother yells my name, Brother Lynn, Brother Lynn. I turn around, and he's coming right toward me. It was a dear brother, LDS brother. And he says these words, first words out of his mouth, he says, your ancestors murdered mine. I've never, ever had a human being say that to me. Your ancestors murdered mine. That really does take it out of history books. Then he says, up until this morning, I have never been able to forgive you guys, meaning us Protestants. He said, will you forgive me? He says that. And we hugged. We went to lunch. Here's what happened that afternoon. I spoke that afternoon. The heavens were cleansed. Oh, that day in Salt Lake City, the heavens were cleansed. I stood up and preached with an unction very seldom ever before in my life. I told the story when the Lord visited our house one evening. Sovereignly, we're sitting at supper table. My wife has scoliosis. She had scoliosis. She slept on a rollaway bed, so she had an abnormal curvature. And I was telling that story that afternoon as the last speaker. And I told them how the Lord just interrupted our supper, okay? And just sovereignly straightens her spine out. Well, we stopped eating. That was, well, I was sharing that with them. So when I was through preaching at 4:30, I started to take my seat. Brother Doug Mendenhall sitting on the front row like that. He stands up and he says, Brother Lynn, right in front of everybody, he says, Brenda, she has scoliosis. So will you pray for her? Yeah, yeah. And I thought he meant, I said, well, yeah, we'll just go. I thought he meant, we'll take her in the back room and minister to him. I said, yeah, just tell me where to go. And he said, no, right now, right now, right here. Okay.